On July 11th, 1826, Roger Jones, Adjutant General, issued general orders on behalf of Jacob Brown, Commanding General of the United States Army. They began, "Never has it fallen the lot of any commander to announce to an army an event such as now calls forth the mingled grief and astonishment of this republic. Never since history first recorded time has one day thus mingled every triumphant with every tender emotion, and consecrated a nation's joy with the tenderest of sorrows. That one day was July the 4th, 1826. It is history that deserves to be remembered." British troops and American patriots were already fighting when the Second Continental Congress was convened on May 10th, 1775. The Second Continental Congress was largely a continuation of the first, which had convened the previous September, although the situation facing the 12, the time Georgia had not yet sent delegates, colonies was quite different following the April 1775 battles of Lexington and Concord. Many of the delegates to the Second Continental Congress had served in the first, including Virginia's Peyton Randolph. Randolph had been elected president of the First Continental Congress, although he had had to take leave in October due to illness. When the Second Continental Congress was convened, he was again elected its president, but just 4 days after the Congress convened, he was called back to Virginia to serve as Speaker of its House of Burgesses. He was replaced in the Virginia delegation by 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson, who arrived to the Congress on June 21st. There, Jefferson would befriend someone who was already a leading figure in the Congress, Massachusetts's John Adams. Adams later recalled Jefferson's arrival in a letter to a friend. Mr. Jefferson came into Congress in June 1775 and brought with him a reputation for literature, science, and a happy talent at composition. Writings of his were handed about, remarkable for the peculiar felicity of expression. Despite the growing conflict, many in the Congress still hoped to gain an agreement with George III, with Pennsylvania's John Dickinson and New York's John Jay leading the call for rapprochement, even as the Congress authorized the creation of an army, with George Washington at its command. But they were opposed by a small but growing number of delegates who had become convinced that an agreement had become impossible and that independence was the only path. That group included Adams and Jefferson. By the summer of 1776, a growing number of colonists were supporting the cause of independence, and the Virginia House of Burgesses voted to have their delegates introduce a resolution declaring independence. On June 7th, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee put forth the Lee Resolution, resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. As the debate over the Lee Resolution commenced, it was clear that several of the delegates were not yet ready to vote to declare independence. The Congress postponed the vote on the Lee Resolution until July 1st, but on June 11th constituted a committee to draft a document declaring independence should the vote succeed. The committee was composed of 5 delegates, including Adams, whose efforts ensured that Thomas Jefferson was also included, along with Pennsylvania's Ben Franklin, New York's John Livingston, and Connecticut's Roger Sherman. Many in the Congress wanted Adams, the leading proponent of independence in the Congress, to draft the document, but he had other ideas. In a letter years later, he described a conversation with Jefferson. "Jefferson proposed to me to make the draft. I said, 'I will not. You shall do it.' 'Oh, no. Why will you not? You ought to do it.' 'I will not. Why?' 'Reasons enough.' 'What can be your reasons?' 'Reason first. You are a Virginian, and Virginia ought to appear at the head of this business. Reason second. I am obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular, and you are very much otherwise. Reason third. You can write 10 times better than I can.' 'Well,' said Jefferson, 'if you are decided, I will do as well as I can.'" Jefferson drew inspiration from a number of sources. The Declaration wasn't simply created from nothing. It is unclear exactly how much influence the rest of the committee had on the document, although it is generally agreed both that they offered some revisions, but that it was substantially the work of Jefferson. The famous painting by John Trumbull, called the Declaration of Independence, on the back of the $2 bill today, is often misunderstood to represent the document's ratification on July 4th, but instead represents the Committee of 5 presenting the document before Congress on June 28th. During debate, the document would undergo further revision, deleting nearly a quarter of Jefferson's original text, but it apparently succeeded in its goal. On July 2nd, the Congress approved the Lee Resolution. Adams considered that vote to be the birth of the nation. In a letter to his wife Abigail on July 3rd, he wrote, Yesterday, the greatest question was decided, which was ever decided among men. A resolution was passed unanimously that these United States are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, belts, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore. For those of you who enjoy watching fireworks on July 4th, their use to celebrate the nation's Independence Day was proposed by John Adams even before July 4th, 1776. But Adams was mistaken as to the day of the celebration. On July 4th, Congress ratified the Declaration of Independence. To inform the colonies, Congress had the Declaration printed. While the Congress had technically declared independence with the passing of the Lee Resolution 2 days earlier, the Declaration of Independence that was circulated said at its very top, "In Congress, July 4th, 1776." And that was the date that people recalled. Although he was off by 2 days, Adams' prediction otherwise came true. From the first organized celebration of Independence Day on July 4th, 1777, through to today, the date has been celebrated with shows, sports, bells, bonfires, and illuminations. The Declaration of Independence was just part of the process of creating the nation. Over the course of the War for Independence, Adams and Jefferson would play many roles, and yet the two men were forever linked by the document for which they, more than any others, were responsible. Both men would have distinguished careers, including as, of course, the second and third presidents of the United States. Their famous friendship would be shattered over the election of 1800, only to be rekindled in 1812, by some accounts at the urging of Adams' wife Abigail. On January 1st of that year, Adams wrote to Jefferson, "I wish you, sir, many happy New Years, and that you may enter the next and many succeeding years with as animating prospects for the public as those at present before us. I am, sir, with a long and sincere esteem, your friend and servant." Jefferson responded on January 21st. "A letter from you calls up recollection very dear to my mind. It carries me back to the times when, beset with difficulties and dangers, we were fellow laborers in the same cause, struggling for what is most valuable to man, his right of self-government." The two would carry on a warm correspondence for the next 14 years. One of the most poignant letters came from Jefferson on November 13th, 1816, offering condolences on the death of Abigail, of typhoid fever. "In the school of affliction, by the loss of every form of connection which can rive the human heart, I know well, and feel that you have lost what you have suffered, are suffering, and have yet to endure. The same trials have taught me that, for ills so immeasurable, time and silence are the only medicines." But Jefferson offered a final sentiment that may to some seem prophetic. "It is of some comfort to us both that the term is not very distant at which we are to deposit, in the same cerement, our sorrows and suffering bodies, and to ascend in essence in an ecstatic meeting with the friends we have loved and lost, and whom we shall love and never lose again." That term might have been somewhat more distant than he imagined, and it would come in an extraordinary way. At a time when the average life expectancy of a white male in the United States was just 44 years, John Adams, age 90, and Thomas Jefferson, age 83, would both live to see the 50th anniversary of the event that would ever link the names Adams and Jefferson with American independence. Jefferson had received an invitation from the Honorable Roger Waitman, mayor of Washington, D.C., to attend a celebration of the auspicious event. In a letter to Waitman on June 24th, he wrote that the invitation was most flattering to myself, but that, with my regret, that ill health forbids me the gratification of an acceptance. Ill health had plagued Jefferson for several years. In January 1826, he wrote to Virginia politician William F. Gordon, "As to the state of my health, it is now 3 weeks since a reacerbation of my painful complaint has confined me to the house, and indeed to my couch. Required to be constantly recumbent, I write slowly and with difficulty. Yesterday, for the first time, I was able to leave the house and to resume a posture which enables me to begin to answer the letters which have been accumulating." The painful complaint was diarrhea and difficulty urinating, likely derived from infections and, historians speculate, advanced prostatic cancer. The website of Jefferson's Monticello writes that on June 24th, 1826, Jefferson's physician was called to his bedside because of an illness, and his condition worsened until he lost consciousness on July 2nd. From then on, Jefferson slept fitfully, waking only to inquire whether it were yet the 4th of July. The Alexandria, Virginia Gazette wrote on July 11th, "On Saturday last, for the first time we had heard that he was ill, and that his physician entertained serious fears of his life. Messengers had been sent to call in his distant relations, but we still trusted to the strength of his constitution. though we awaited the event of trembling solicitude. On the morning of the anniversary, more alarming accounts reached us that his complaint of the summer disease had left him, yet that his physician was afraid that he had not strength enough to rally from the attack. The New York American wrote that Mr. Jefferson expired on the 4th, about 10 minutes before 1 in the afternoon, after confinement to his bed of little more than a week, though the disease of which he had died had been of long continuance. He suffered little bodily pain and apparently none at all in mind, spoke as if approaching end with the most perfect composure, and indicated no solitude, except for that his life should be prolonged to the 4th. Adams had also been invited by Waitman to attend the celebration. For him, the invitation would have had extra meaning. His son, John Quincy, was president. Like Jefferson and the other surviving signature of the Declaration of Independence, Marylander Charles Carroll, Adams had to decline the invitation due to ill health. Adams had remained surprisingly fit for a nonagenarian, but his health had declined in the spring of 1826. The National Gazette wrote, "The decay of Mr. Adams' bodily facilities proceeded for several months antecedent to his decease, so as nearly to extinguish all hope of the protection of his life beyond the present summer. It is said that he rose on the 4th without any particular increase in his debility, but became quite ill about noon, and then gradually grew worse." The Boston Courier reported died at his residence in Quincy at 6 o'clock in the afternoon of the 4th of July, John Adams, in the 90th year of his age. The Alexandria Gazette wrote, "At the age of 90, at the completion of a half-century from the commencement of the revolution that he had been so instrumental in effecting, he sunk by gradual decay into the arms of death." The cause of John Adams' death is somewhat speculative. It was officially listed as debility due to age. Historians today generally conclude that he died of heart failure, as the New York American wrote on July 7th. Thus burst his mighty heart. It has been widely reported that Adams' last words were, "Jefferson survives." That might not be wholly accurate. Adams' niece, who was present at his death, later told the wife of Boston's mayor that the last words he distinctly spoke was the name Thomas Jefferson, but that the rest of the sentence he uttered was so inarticulate that she could not catch the meaning. This occurred at 1 o'clock, a few moments after Mr. Jefferson had died. Although the Alexandria Gazette gave a different account. On the Jubilee of Independence, his declining faculties were roused by the rejoicing in the metropolis. He inquired the cause of the salutes and was told that it was the 4th of July. He answered, "It is a great and glorious day." He never spake more. The loss of these two men on that day struck the nation. The National Gazette wrote, "The dissolution of 2 of the 3 survivors of the magnanimous men who raised the perpetual standard of American sovereignty within the same day, being that which closed the 50th year since their glorious deed, makes a coincidence so striking that it has immediately affected every person, and in a former age would have been deemed ominous, or at least a special dispensation of divine providence." The New York American opined, "We remember nothing in the annals of man so striking, so beautiful as the death of these 2 time-honored patriots on the jubilee of that freedom which they devoted themselves, and all that was dear to them, to proclaim and establish." On August 2nd, Daniel Webster, then a member of the House of Representatives from Massachusetts, delivered a speech at Faneuil Hall in Boston. "Adams and Jefferson are no more. On our 50th anniversary, the great day of national jubilee, in the very hour of public rejoicing, in the midst of echoing and re-echoing voices of thanksgiving, while their own names were on all tongues, they took their flight together to the world of spirits. It cannot but seem striking and extraordinary that these 2 should live to see the 50th year from the date of that act, that they should complete that year, and that then, on the day which has fast linked forever their own fame with their country's glory, the heavens should open to receive them both at once." In a stunning coincidence, James Monroe, the nation's 5th president, died 5 years later, on July 4th, 1831. While Monroe had not been part of the Continental Congress, he had fought in the War for Independence and is considered by many to be the last of the founding father presidents. July 4th is the only day upon which 3 U.S. presidents have died. Both Adams and Jefferson received criticism, both in their time and since. The Alexandria Gazette addressed such concerns when talking of Adams' final years. "The blast of calumny which assailed his declining years never ruffled the serenity of his mind. He regarded them as little as the troubled elements, for he knew that, like them, they would soon subside, and that then everything would be like his own bosom, peace and sunshine. To say that he had weak points and foibles was but to say that he was a man." There are various theories as to how the stunning coincidence of these two men could occur not just on the same day, but on such a momentous day related to their lives. Maybe it was the force of their will to make it to that day. But many in the nation saw it as proof of divine providence. President John Quincy Adams remarked that it visibly and palpably remarks of divine favor. Certainly, both of the men understood the importance of that anniversary. In one of his last writings, Thomas Jefferson began a draft of the speech that he would have given had he been able to attend the celebration. It read in part, "May the Declaration of Independence be to the world what I believe it to be, the signal to arouse men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-governance." I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguyguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you have to do is subscribe.